Welcome everybody to this edition of Attention Talk Video. I'm your host, Attention and ADHD coach Jeff Copper, and I'm here today to talk to you about the hard part of mindfulness. I've done some interviews, actually a bunch of interviews on Attention Talk Radio, I think like 300 or more. In that process, it's kind of funny because we talk about how all roads seem to lead to mindfulness. At the end of the day, it's actually you're kind of witnessing your brain and kind of overriding it. And over the years, we actually did a show about a year ago that we actually wrote out to the experts and said, basically, do you think mindfulness is helpful for those with ADHD? And it was ubiquitous. Everybody said absolutely across the board. The second question is, was it more difficult or is it more difficult for those with ADHD to practice mindfulness? And almost across the board, everybody said absolutely yes. And I want to kind of talk about that because if we've got something that is very helpful for those with ADHD and it's hard, why is it hard and what could we do about it? Well, first of all, the first level of difficulty really kind of goes into the fundamentals of ADHD is your brain is being bombarded with ideas. And one of the fundamental concepts oversimplifying mindfulness or meditation is where you're focused in on an object. And when you notice an extraneous thought come to mind, you let it go and you bring your focus back to the object. Well, if you've got ADHD or ADD and you've got a gazillion ideas flying in your head left and right, it's very difficult to block that out. That's why the practice is so good, just to sit there and just kind of let it go. I call it an attention exercise, just like a basketball player might shoot free throws. You need to sit down and you need to meditate or do this mindfulness thing, and it's a moment of practice. You're not going to focus on the object the entire time. You're going to get distracted, and the idea is to keep practicing, bringing it back, so in everyday life, you've kind of patterned that behavior. Or as the basketball player is every time he gets up to the free throw line, his body takes over and he doesn't really think about it. Now, with that being said, that's a more difficult part, and you can start off really small and work your way up, and there's a gazillion different ways to practice mindfulness. There's moving mindfulness. There's actually meditation. You can stare at a candle. The point of this video is really not to get into that, but to say it's basic level, that's a little bit difficult. The big insight for me, though, and I've been trying to talk to my colleagues about it, that I think everybody's missing is that exercise of any kind, by definition, is a repetitive and boring routine task. I do a lot of speaking around the country with regard to ADHD and exercise, and I talk about it. It's a boring task, and it's classic. Those with ADHD struggle with anything that's repetitive and boring, so they're going to procrastinate on it. When I'm working with those with ADHD, and my prescription really is focus on brain stimulation, which is usually social. If you're doing some type of exercise with somebody else, that's primary, and the exercise becomes secondary. So I do a lot of riding, I do a lot of running, I do a lot of swimming, but it's always with an exercise partner, and there's a social aspect to it, and then I get in shape kind of along the way. If you go into a fitness gym, people on the exercise bikes, they're watching TV, they're listening to podcasts, they're reading a book. There's this primary thing that's got your attention, and the exercise as a result has happened secondarily. My big issue and thing about mindfulness is it's an exercise, just like physical exercise. It requires practice. There's a certain extent of it that's repetitive and boring. And ideally, we need to have the ADHD mindful class, like the Zumba class at the Y, where everybody comes together and somebody leads them through these mindfulness exercises. Now you've got an environment where other people are going. There's a scheduled time. You might go for coffee afterwards. You might have a conversation. All of a sudden, it's much more interesting, thereby removing the obstacle, making it easier for those with ADHD to go engage in it. Now, you don't need to go to the YMCA for the ADHD mindful Zumba class, if you will, but that notion of being able to practice with somebody else and doing it with somebody else, maybe in a different environment, on some type of adventure, these are characteristics that make things much more exciting for those with ADHD and enable them to do what they can't necessarily do for themselves. So with regard to the space, today the tip and the insight, as I really just wanted to get to the core, there's no question across the board, mindfulness is helpful for those with ADHD. To me, it's an attention exercise that needs to be practiced on a regular basis to improve your skills of self-regulation of your attention, which really makes a lot of sense. The challenge is it's more difficult for you with ADHD, and it's more difficult because it's very difficult for you to do a repetitive and boring routine task by yourself. And my advice is try to go find another environment, other people to do this with on a regular basis. My hope is that some of you out there will be able to find somebody to do this, sit down and meditate on a regular basis, or practice mindfulness practices, and then actually be able to witness yourself and manage your ADHD in the environment. We hope that you've found some insight in this tip. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to Attention Talk Video at the button just kind of down below. And regularly you'll get our weekly tip or video, and you'll actually be able to go through our archive. So we hope you've enjoyed the show. Take care.